Record. All right, let me start again for a moment because I had forgotten to record. Now it is recording. Welcome to all of you. This is the ethics sections, the second workshop out of 4 on ethics in scientific research from the 2020 Summer Research Institute at St. Thomas University in collaboration with Miami-Dade College. All right, I see a number of you on the tiles here. Can you people see the tiles? Can you see the tiles of your faces on my computer?
Yes.
You can see the tiles here, yes? Okay, good. Okay, I'll be moving. All right, thank you. Let's see, so need to get back here. Many screens open. Start by doing this, have a little more access. Too many screens opening. This is the intro. My name is Alfred Cioffi. I'm one of the research professors at St. Thomas University and teaching there also. Say a little bit about myself while this thing is trying to open. Maybe I have too many windows open here. See if it goes one of them anyway. And by way of a brief background, I teach biology and bioethics at St. Thomas University. And I always say that it's important in the area, in any field, in science or knowledge, to understand the person is speaking. We all have an opinion, right? And we respect everybody on the moment. So academically, in Rome, in moral theology, in now, that's just to my background. I'm also a Catholic professor. I know Thomas University is our Catholic diocesan university. Okay, very happy to be there. For some reason, that window is having difficulty, and that's a little introduction. Let me shut it down and try again. Because we already had one session last Tuesday, and I was mentioning that it's always important to cite one's works that are being used. And what I'm using for these 4 little workshops on ethics in research is a book or a booklet published by the National Academy of Sciences, and it's called On Being a Scientist. On Being a Scientist. 7 different. I need to go back here for a moment. This little booklet published by the National Academy of Sciences is very succinct, and it has a dozen chapters, and I'm just going through the chapters, about 3 chapters per session, and they're short. They're typically just 2 to 3 pages each, but they have a wealth of information. And they also have little case studies, scenarios that we're going to get into it pretty soon. As soon as I can get to open the little book here. The other thing is that sometimes this bar is in the way of the tabs. End up moving it around. Oh, good, I can put it down here. Excellent, better. Okay, I'll show you the reference in a moment. What I have there, what I'm trying to open is the reference of this book so that you have it from the beginning. And this is what I've been using. I used it last Tuesday, today, and then next week's sessions also. How many of you were present last Tuesday? Maybe a show of hands. No. think we have about 16 participants now. So it may be a little hard to see, show of hands. Anyway, we're recording the sessions and we post them in our Google website. I need to apologize, folks. I guess I have too many windows. So give me a minute to close windows. To minimize the tab. I was hoping that I could just have these windows open, but I think I'll have to go one by one. So let me close some. Okay. Back to the folder. This can close. So we'll go one at a time. Okay. Here we go. Thank you for your patience. So this is the reference that I'm using for the workshops. Okay. The title of the booklet is On Being a Scientist. I'm using the latest edition, which is the third. And it's put out by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and the Institutes of Medicine. You can download it for free at this website, and it's a handy guide to have throughout your college years. Particularly if you're going to be involved in research in any of the labs, which typically are undergraduates are all encouraged to do some research or projects. So you can download it for free, even on your phone if you wish, and keep it there for reference, all right? Okay, a little basic protocol for speaking. If you would just state your first name, just your first name, and wait a couple of seconds. If no one else jumps in, then go ahead and make your statement, question, or comment, whatever you'd like to say. All right, definitely we want these sessions to be interactive. So that way we'll only have one conversation at a time. Also, if you anticipate some noise in the background wherever you are, then you can mute your mic and just unmute when you want to say something. All right? Okay.
Father, this is Dean Fernandez right here. Since
yes,
you're
hello,
hosting,
Dean.
you can mute people and then just have them use the raise hand function. That way, you know, it works better. Okay. So you can just do mute everybody and then unmute when need to.
Okay, and that means I need to go to the controls somewhere. The only thing is I will probably need
just click on participants. Yeah, click on participants.
Okay, let me see if I can find participants. Would that be in the menu here? Yes, I see participants 19. All right.
You should have a button there.
I see, yes. Mute, yes, I see it. Right. Now, does that mean that I need to keep the tile open to see everybody's hand, or do I get a little signal or something?
Yep, just keep it open on the side.
All right. However, we have about 19 participants, so my computer only covers about 6 tiles at a time, 5 or 6 tiles. I will not be able to see everybody's hand. Well, we'll give it a try. If I don't acknowledge you, raise your hand, and if I don't see your hand for whatever reason, then unmute your microphone and speak up. All right, how's that? Will that work? All right, let's go forward a little bit here. I was just giving my credentials a little earlier. mentioned a doctorate in moral theology from the Gregorian University in Rome, and then the doctorate in genetics from Purdue. And I've been teaching for about a dozen years at St. Thomas University, biology and bioethics. So that's my academic background, basically, just in a nutshell. I've been studying, teaching and studying, a student and a teacher practically all my life, in many different places of the world and so forth. But I enjoy teaching and learning all the time. I say, by the way, that the best student is a teacher, and the best teacher is a student, right? Because we're always learning and seeking knowledge. Let me close this now so that I can open another tab with today's slide. What we're doing is we're looking at case studies to get into the subject matter. Session 2. And we had covered 4 little chapters the first session. So we're going to cover 3 more today. Is in the area of the professional ethics that need to be upheld in research and in our professional lives, so that we are consistent with the value system that will help us advance and at the same time maintain integrity with regards to our results, our research and publications, so forth. So let's get to a case right away, as we have been doing in the past. I wonder if this is a little small on the screen, or can you read it? Someone can just respond if you can read it, and if I need to make it bigger.
It's readable.
It is readable. Okay.
Yes, you can read it.
Okay, so we're looking at this case now. Vijay, who has just finished his first year of graduate school, is applying to the National Science Foundation for a pre-doctoral fellowship. He's working in a lab where he did a rotation project and was later carried on successfully by others. And it appears that a manuscript will be prepared for publication by the end of the summer. However, the fellowship application deadline is June 1st, which just happened. And Vijay decides it would be advantageous to list a publication as submitted rather than in progress. Okay. So when we're working on a publication, which is typically the result of research, we may make the claim that the publication is in progress, all right? But we have not submitted it yet, so there are different categories here. In progress means that we're working still on the draft, and it's about to be submitted for publication, but has not been submitted yet. Then the third step after submitted is that it was either accepted or rejected. Hopefully, if it was rejected, recommendations came back with that rejection, so that if we follow those recommendations, we may be able to resubmit and hopefully get it published, right? Without consulting the faculty member or other colleagues involved, Vijay makes up a title and author list for a submitted paper and cites it in his application. Okay. After the application has been mailed, a lab member sees it and goes to the faculty member to ask about the submitted manuscript. This lab member didn't know that this lab had just published or had just submitted a publication. Vijay admits to fabricating the submission of the paper, but explains his actions by saying that he thought the practice was not uncommon in science. The faculty members in Vijay's department demand that he withdraw his grant proposal and dismiss him from the graduate program. So that was quite a cold shower, right? Let's look at some questions. Just take them in order. Do you think that researchers often exaggerate the publication status of the work in written materials? What do you think? What's your impression with regards to publications and exaggerations of publications? Okay, I see Stephanie.
Yes. Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I don't think there's exaggerations to publications. Small percentage of researchers may, but not all.
Mm-hmm. Right. So some researchers, some scientists, some professors may boast about their publications and so forth, but to go ahead and claim a publication that has been submitted while that publication doesn't really exist, what's your sense? Is that serious or is that light? Anybody?
No, I think they acted appropriate.
Okay, so that gets us into the second question. Do you think the department acted too harshly in dismissing VJ from the graduate program? Some of these questions are open-ended in the sense that they may not have a yes or no answer, okay, black and white. Some do, but some we can say, well, it depends. There are certainly policies and procedures to be followed, but it's important for the students to find out and also for the researchers to let the students know what those policies and procedures are. Okay? So if VJ later applied to a graduate program at another institution, does that institution have the right to know what happened? What do you think about this one?
I think yes, because every institution has the right to uphold their academic integrity. And unfortunately, he violated that as a student. So I think it is important for that institution to know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other opinion there?
I think they could ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessary. Some don't. Some don't even look at that, but some will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're saying maybe this institution would ask, but not volunteer it directly, right? In other words, the university or the institution from where he was expelled, is that institution going to publish that and so forth? You know, here we have to be careful because maybe VJ comes from some culture that where they don't have necessarily the same value system that we have, or the ethos, which is the cultural ethics of the place, may not have the same concept that we have with regards to private property or intellectual property. We'll have another chapter on intellectual property, actually. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of the game here, but not all cultures have the same value system of beliefs. And he may come from a culture where these things are more held in common and so forth. What I'm trying to say by this is that it behooves the professor who takes on his or her students to lay out what are the rules and regulations, especially if they are international students. They may not know many of the values and beliefs that we have in our own culture. And we may assume that they know, but they may not. In other words, VJ may have been honest when he said he really did not he didn't think that that was a big deal. In other words, that apparently wherever he's coming from, that is kind acceptable. It's not uncommon. He's misinformed, of course. He's misinformed, okay? Because it is a big deal. We don't fabricate, we don't make up publications and such. But it could be that he really didn't know it was that big of a deal. Being dismissed from a graduate program is certainly a big deal. Now, to go a step further and publish that or tell other institutions, it's really going beyond. Probably PJ would learn a lesson, a very hard lesson that he learned, okay? But he also deserves another chance to apply at another institution, perhaps get accepted, and start fresh, now knowing the rules of the road, how to behave professionally, how to maintain professional integrity. Hopefully someone would have given him this little booklet on his way out of that institution. They could have given him on being a scientist. Say, Vijay, you could really benefit from reading this little booklet if you want to pursue a career in science, because this will help you a lot in understanding the professional rigor and the professional integrity that we need to maintain. Okay. So that one goes into the fourth question here, really. What were Vijay's advisor's responsibilities in reviewing the application before it was submitted? So who wants to jump in on this one? Anyone? The advisor. Now, the booklet also uses regularly the word advisor, and I changed it in some places, but didn't catch all of them. For our purpose, the advisor is the principal investigator, right? Because typically, advisor in academia is used more for academic advisement by way of someone who, a professor who typically tells a student or plans a student, advises a student on what courses he or she should take for the next semesters to stay on track in the program. So it's more on the academic side. But in research, we use this other little phrase, principal investigator or main investigator, right? And we abbreviate it as PI, principal investigator. Every lab has a PI. The lab may or may not have students, but the lab will always have a PI, a principal investigator, who's the one running the lab. And so that is a professor. And well, if it's in a university, it could be another research institution that is not necessarily academic. It could be a federal government agency, etc. But the lab will always have a principal investigator. And it is the responsibility of that person to maintain law and order, as it were, in her or his lab, okay? And so certainly it was the responsibility of the principal investigator to review that application before it was submitted. So that's another thing that Vijay may not have known, that he really was not at liberty to submit an application on behalf of the lab without having consulted with the PI, right? Minimally with the PI, and preferably also with his co-workers, the other members of the team. So yes, there was responsibility on the side of the principal investigator with regards to this graduate student who was working in his lab, okay, and applying for this grant. Okay, anything else on this particular case that anyone wants to comment? This chapter on research misconduct, it's an important chapter. It's one of the key chapters of the little booklet of the text. And it has three big definitions here: fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. And they have been defined already officially by the US Office of Science and Technology, and this goes into the policy of grants when we have grant applications and when grants are allotted, to be true to these statements, all right? And these are no-nos, these are unacceptable. Fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, sometimes you see them as FFP. In proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results. So fabrication is making up data or results that is false, that is not true, making it up. Falsification is manipulating the research of the equipment or processes, changing or omitting data or results so that the research is not accurately represented in the research record. Okay. That's falsification. And then plagiarism is the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. So it's not just words. In other words, I think most students are familiar with plagiarism, copying words, text from various sources without giving a proper reference. But it's not just that. It can also be ideas, for example, intellectual property, okay? Or procedures in the lab, results, and so forth. Anything that belongs to someone else, we need to give the proper reference. Okay, so sometimes these cases are difficult to handle because they involve real life human beings. But I want to mention also that when we are judging, yes, it says, do not judge and you will not be judged. But here we do have to judge, but we never judge the person. We never judge the person. What we judge is the actions of the person. And certainly by focusing on the actions, we can do an objective ethics. All right, we can do an objective ethics in the sense that regardless of who is engaged in those actions, certain actions are correct and other actions are incorrect. Is misconduct. That's why it's misconduct is actually on the conduct, on the action of the person. But we never judge the conscience of the person because only God can judge the conscience, right? Only God can see our conscience and judge there. This is going to be important when we look at the next case because it's going to be not about someone who is involved in the misconduct, but when we experience someone else involved in misconduct, what to do when we see someone else involved in misconduct. So let's go to that other little chapter here. Is reporting when someone else is engaged in misconduct. How to handle that? To what extent do we need to report? Is there an obligation or not? And then what kind of assurances that we have with regards to anonymity or no retaliation, because that is also unethical and illegal to retaliate on someone who is responding a misconduct or a suspected violation of standards. Now, this word standard also has a kind of a technical meaning. We covered it in the first session. And the standard values, the value system, pretty much the system we like to be with honesty, with diversity, truth, respect, right? This is flow from a personal into the work environment, into the research environment, into academia. And so these are the standards that we talk about, okay? They are value systems that we hear and we seek to promote them. Let's look at this other case. Peter was just in participation when he realized that something was seriously amiss with the work of a fellow graduate student, Jimmy. Peter was convinced that Jimmy was not actually making the measurements he claimed to be making. They shared the same lab, but Jimmy rarely seemed to be there. He was kind of missing in action. Sometimes Peter would research materials, would see, actually, there's a word missing here, sorry. He would see research material thrown away unopened. The results Jimmy was turning in to their common dissertation advisor and principal investigator seemed too clean to be real. Let me make a little parenthesis here. Peter seems to have some experience at research, and I can tell you from decades and decades that seldom are results clean, all right? Because it's not right. We have to tweak the reagents or the conditions of the experiment for it to really work. And then the results may not be as clear-cut as we were expecting. And so, for example, I don't know if you're running a gel or something like that, the bars may be not as clean as you wanted them, maybe fuzzy, just one example. But it seems that Jimmy always had very clean results, and seldom does in a lab, even with the most experienced of researchers. Peter knew that he would soon need to ask his PI for a letter of recommendation for faculty and postdoctoral positions, because Peter is about to finish his PhD, right, and start his professional career. If he raised the issue with his PI now, he was sure that it would affect the letter of recommendation, because it turns out that Jimmy was a favorite of the PI who had often helped Jimmy before when his project ran into problems. Yet Peter also knew that if he waited to raise the issue, the question would inevitably arise as to when he first suspected problems. Sorry, comment? New York Eastern Time. It's a lot of shit I want to do. Sorry, there's a mic that's open somewhere. Please keep your mics mute unless you want to say something to the issue, okay? Okay, coming to the end. Both Peter and his PI were using Jimmy's results in their own research, because this is collaborative, this is teamwork, and the results of one student are also incorporated into the research of the other students in the lab, right? Perhaps it's a common project that has different phases and they all fit together kind of like a puzzle. So if Jimmy's data were inaccurate, they both needed to know as soon as possible, both Peter and the principal investigator. So it's serious what Jimmy is doing, whatever Jimmy is doing, but Peter has a suspicion that it's not looking good. So get some questions here. What kind of evidence should Peter have to be able to go to his PI? What do you think? Some evidence? What kind of evidence? You may need to know a little bit here with regards to the lab notebook, okay? I believe you all have a lab notebook, right? At least one from MDC. And if you're a student at STU, you'll have one too. MDC students may get a second notebook from St. Thomas. But all students, all researchers have a lab notebook where things are written down. And that is like your second self, that notebook, everything should go in the notebook, all right? Everything that pertains to the lab and to the research and the experiments and so forth. And so it's not important that the lab notebook be really neat in different colors and so forth. What is important is that the lab notebook be accurate and may be able to be read by everybody else who looks at it. Dr. Fernandez, Dean Fernandez, please go ahead.
Yes, to expand on the lab notebook, actually, let me do this. All right, so to expand on the lab notebook, lab notebooks are admissible evidence in court. So that's why, thinking from the legal standpoint, whenever there is a case of patent infringement, for example, which is very common, the first piece of evidence that is presented is the lab notebook. So the lab notebook, it's important. It has to be in ink. It cannot have whiteout, and it has to also be, I don't like multicolor, but either you want it blue or black. That's pretty much it. It cannot have torn pages, no whiteout, and no taping of things on it, because you have to treat the lab notebook as evidence. So it does have legal weight. So that's why you may see some professors harp a lot on the lab notebook, or the lab notebook this or that, but there's a very good reason why the lab notebook is important. So
Absolutely. Thank you, Doctor.
thank you.
In fact, the lab notebook is yours kind of on loan, all right? You certainly own it while you're doing the research, and you put your data there and everything, comments, everything else, but it really belongs to the lab. The lab notebook belongs to the lab, okay? So when you leave it behind. And it's again, the PI who is responsible for maintaining these notebooks available, even into the future, because years from now, an experiment that was successful and so forth, people will go back and they may want to see the original data that was used in the publication, etc. So the lab notebook, very important. Again, it doesn't have to be neat. I know that some people want to have their notebooks very, very neat and so forth, like multicolor. No, it has to be accurate. It has to be readable. But you can scribble here and there. You can, with regards to the no whiteout, yeah, if I can expand a little bit on that, we write things out, and if we make a mistake, we just put a line over it. Put a line over it so that one can read the mistake. No problem. We can make mistakes. That's all right. Misspellings, doesn't matter. We write stuff. We made a mistake. We put a line over it, a horizontal line, a cross out, and then we write the correct statement underneath, the correction. So that's how it is. It's kind of it's an open soul. It's an open culture. It's an open thinking. It's a thinking on paper. The lab book is kind of a thinking on paper. All right. So having said all that about the notebook and so forth, what kind of evidence do you think Peter would bring to the PI? Anyone?
He would bring all the work that he has done, or everything that he's done in the lab, literally taken note on the lab notebook.
Right. Okay. So certainly Peter would bring his own lab notebook. All right. But Peter does not really have direct access to Jimmy's notebook. Only the PI. The PI does have access. Should have access to Jimmy's notebook, to Jimmy's lab book. All right. But Peter can certainly say, look, professor, these are my notes on the similar experiment or the parallel experiment and so forth, or the first half of the experiment, and look how it was developing. And then you could, Peter could suggest, and the PI is going to think of it right away, go to Jimmy's notebook and see if it matches up with what we were doing. And these are my suspicions here and here and here. So the PI can go to that particular day and so forth and look at the work of Jimmy in Jimmy's own notebook. All right, so that lab book should normally stay in the lab. Sometimes in mine, for example, it's a field research, so we need to take the notebook out into the field and such. But it should be in an area that's accessible to the principal investigator. All right, so should Peter first try to talk with Jimmy before talking to the PI, or with someone else entirely? How do you feel about Peter approaching Jimmy directly? Again, some of these are open questions, you know, there's no only one correct answer. How would you answer this one with Peter approaching Jimmy first directly?
I think he should approach the PI first. So always
Okay.
approach the PI first before approaching anyone.
All right, good. You have a good sense of who the PI is. Is really the owner of the lab by way of responsibility, okay? If anything happens in the lab, is that PI's responsibility one way or another. Um, yes, so I would say really it depends. It depends, honestly. There is a principle in bioethics that we use, is the principle of subsidiarity. And the principle of subsidiarity means that basically we try to deal with an issue at the most local level first, all right, at the most local level. So if you have a grievance with your neighbor, go try to talk with your neighbor before you escalate and bring a third party in. And certainly before you take your neighbor to court or anything like that. So the principle of subsidiarity is that we always try to use the most local level first. It's kind of a containment principle so that the thing doesn't get out of hand, doesn't explode. However, having said that, if Peter and Jimmy are both students in the lab, Peter may or may not be comfortable approaching Jimmy directly, especially if Peter has strong suspicions that Jimmy is cheating somehow, okay, is making up data, whatnot, then it could be too intimidating for Peter. So it depends what kind of relationship they have. That's why it's always important and good to develop a relationship between the students among themselves so that there's good, honest, and frank communication. But Peter may not be comfortable approaching Jimmy directly. Yes, Dean Fernandez, please.
So I don't know if you discussed David Baltimore, the Baltimore affair, which is a
No.
case in scientific. So a little bit of background. So David Baltimore, professor of molecular biology, he is a Nobel laureate, 1975 Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology. He essentially, his work with a couple of more collaborators elucidated what is essentially the mechanism of, what RNA does and DNA. So beautiful work. David Baltimore was 38 years old when he got the Nobel Prize. So that's, very young when you think of Nobel Prizes. So in his, later on, he published, when he has his own research group and everything out of he was at Harvard at the time. In 1986, he published a paper in Cell, which is a big major journal in the area of molecular biology. And a few months later, people were trying to use the work on that paper for their own research, and they couldn't replicate. They couldn't do it. So they started raising some questions. Then a postdoc in his lab went to the lab notebooks, started working, trying to replicate the results, and couldn't do it. So that new postdoc went to the PI, to Professor Baltimore, and told her, there's something wrong here. This doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. And the PI didn't pay, Baltimore in this case, dismissed the claim. And essentially, she was branded as a troublemaker because of raising the issue that the data was not correct there. So it's a longer affair. I don't want to take up the time, but it's a great case if you want to look it up, the Baltimore affair. But in the end, the federal government had to go in and investigate because there was federal funding attached to the project, and the claim of plagiarism came about. So the idea, yes, you need to be able to address things with your PI. Certainly you want to do it with your neighbor, your fellow classmate, but you need to be able to address things with your PI. And evidence is king here, And in the case of that Baltimore affair, really one of the big issues there was the name. I mean, you're going to question a Nobel Prize winner? That's that was kind of one of the backdrops in the case.
Very intimidating.
Even though the data was there, the real data was there, you still, that poster was questioning a Nobel Prize winner. So it's like, how you dare, how dare you do that? I mean, So it's always, you know, when with evidence, evidence is king, you know, in legal matters and in science also.
Yeah.
So if the evidence is flawed, you know, you shouldn't be penalized because you're looking at that. So certainly, right, you want you want to address this with the PI. I mean, that is in scientific matters, you know, that would be my view, and that's the view I would hope all students address it with the PI and use evidence, because the effects can be long lasting. To the, you know, David Baltimore did resign his Harvard position, even though he's now at he was at Caltech. Actually, he was the president of Caltech later on. You know, his reputation didn't take a big hit. Administratively, in research, yeah, certainly. So that's that's a great question you brought in. That's an interesting case, and the Baltimore affair does tie into that one, because the professor, the student that did the research in Baltimore's lab, she went to a position at MIT. So she actually had a professor position at MIT. So we're talking, you know, these are, you know, high level type of academic settings there. So very
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yes, yes. Also, keep in mind that because it segues into law, as Dean Fernandez has pointed out, but even just out of conscience, right? We have to be careful not to destroy another person's reputation simply because of a suspicion. So certainly Peter needs to, the burden of proof, let's say it's on Peter to pretty much be pretty certain of the suspicion that he has, and going to the PI should always be kept also confidential. It's not that they're going to be doing this at a public meeting or anything like that, all right? It should be in confidentiality, because it could be that Jimmy is just a whiz kid and is doing the work and is very neat and clean and everything else, and his results are just that clean. And it could be that Jimmy is doing nothing wrong, right? So we have to be careful with not destroying another person's reputation. But if there is a suspicion, definitely we need to follow up, all right? If there's a suspicion of violation, notice, it's not our responsibility to prove this is a suspected violation. It's not our responsibility to prove that violation. That will fall on other people's hands, beginning with the PI, and then we're going to talk about ethics boards and institutional review boards. Okay, now I'm trying to get down here into a chat. See, for a moment.
I just posted the link of a summary of the case in case anybody wants to look at it. So.
Okay, yeah, from UM. Thank you. There it is. Okay, so this is also a good opportunity to introduce some agencies from the federal government because, so the bulk of, well, the bulk, let me see how to phrase this. Much of the research in the United States, which is one of the major countries of research in the world, is done through two big federal agencies that offer grants for research, and the budgets are in the billions of dollars annually. I'm talking about the National Science Foundation, NSF, National Science Foundation, and also the NIH, National Institutes of Health. And these are two great funding agencies at the federal level in the United States. And their budget, their annual budget is in the billions of dollars. Typically, NIH is for research in human research. So all of medicine, medical research will go in there, for example. And then NSF takes care of the non-human research, including astronomy, practically everything else, including the social sciences, by the way. So the federal government has agencies that also regulate this, research integrity, for example, and professional standards. And it is a big to-do because today, unfortunately, we see that a number of scientists have published fraudulent data. At the beginning of this century, when I was doing my PhD at Purdue, the stem cell research was a big thing. And there was a professor from a foreign country who claimed to have done the first human cloning and published not one, but two papers in Science. Nature and Science are two of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. And he did two papers in Science claiming that he had done human cloning, which would have made him the first one in the 2004, 2005, thereabout. And it turns out to be, it was false. He had actually photoshopped the data, the photographs, the microphotographs that he was showing of the cells. And he was discovered. And of course, he fell from grace. And I think eventually he just disappeared from the map. But it's serious and it's sad to see that some researchers do publish things that are incorrect. And you have to know that there's a lot of pressure for publishing. There's another little saying in academia, publish or perish, especially for the tier 1 universities and so forth, these large research universities where professors are offered tenure, typically within 5 years, more or less, but that implies a number of publications. And if the professor does not publish or does not publish enough, or then they will not advance in rank, right? From assistant to associate professor is typically the big shift, or even from associate to full professor. So there is monetary recompense, if you will, aside from the prestige and so forth in publications, but they have to be honest. They have to be honest. And now, practically all scientific journals, all professional journals have established ethics review boards within them, internal boards that take a look at the data, and when there is suspicion of something or the claim is a little too far-reaching, to really put the paper to rigor and see if there is any suspicion of manipulation of the data, all right? Okay, let me move on to the third case before it gets too late. And this one is on human subjects of research and animal subjects of research. So you see that there's a certain progression here in the topics as we move forward to research itself. Typically has to be done on some living organism, whether it's bacteria or plants, animals, and also humans. So we need to do a certain level of research on humans. Otherwise, we don't really advance. I see a few more chats. Please.
Yeah. So, Father, I posted a link related to what you were discussing about publications.
Okay.
So, on February of this year, a scientist, Elizabeth Bick, who has made a little bit of a career looking at she was able to pinpoint and put this on social media about 400 papers that were generated using artificial intelligence.
Wow.
And they were mostly coming out of some journals were peer reviewed. They all pretty much a bunch of them, all of them use the same Western blot, which is one technique. So I put a link in there. So you guys can see that, now with artificial intelligence and, data being out there available, that, it has become a problem. Fake data, as you were mentioning, and the pressure to publish has driven cases like this. So I posted a link so you guys can, students can see further into it.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, and this counts also for your own research and so forth. I'll be talking a little bit more about the research that you'll have to do virtually But I'll be talking about that next week and integrating it into these ethics courses. But keep these links handy, all right? Because you can go further into it. And just because we are professors doesn't mean that everyone has the same ethics or value system, and especially under pressure to publish or perish, like I say, their career may be hanging on that, and they may feel pressured into doing unethical things, and then that contaminates the data, if you will. It contaminates the knowledge of science. Imagine if these databases now, when I was doing the genetics research, I was using the NCBI human genome that had just come out database, 3 billion base pairs. If there's fraud in that, imagine how many other experiments it's going to contaminate with misinformation. It's like this issue of fake news, right? Well, fake news is not just in social media. Fake news can also occur in science and have devastating results, really, because we never know who else is going to be using that data in what other kind of experiment. It may even translate into a human experiment on a medication or a procedure, a protocol, whatever, and it can give misinformation into the field of medicine. Okay, so let's delve into this. I have a couple more cases here to look at. For his dissertation project in psychology, Antonio is studying new approaches to strengthen memory. All right. He can apply these techniques to create interactive web-based instructional modules. He plans to test these modules with students in a general psychology course for which he is a teaching assistant. So this is the TA. Typically the PI, we use a lot of acronyms, a lot of abbreviations. So the PI is the principal investigator. And if the PI is lucky enough, she or he will get either TAs or RAs. TAs are teaching assistants and RAs are research assistants. So these will be like his general managers who can run the lab or the lectures, depending. And hopefully there will be these TAs and RAs will be funded through grants or some kind of institutional money, so that will help the PI, will free up some of the time with the PI to plan the research and write up the publications, etc. So anyway, this young fellow Antonio is a teaching assistant. He's a graduate student, and he has this project. He's going to try out this project on his on the students that he's teaching. Typically undergrad, right? He'll be teaching undergrad students. He expects that students, volunteers who use the modules will subsequently perform better on examinations than other students. He hopes to publish the results in a conference proceedings on research in learning, because he plans to apply for an academic position after he completes the doctorate. Okay, so he's going to use his students kind of like guinea pigs, and let's see, what needs to happen before he does that. Should Antonio seek IRB approval for his research project with human participants? Okay, I need to tell you what this other acronym is, IRB. The IRB, anybody know what is an IRB? Anyone? You can just unmute and speak up.
Isn't that a board where your research is evaluated and credited?
Exactly, yes, yes. Who was that, yeah?
Tajay?
Okay, thank you. Yes, exactly. So it's an institutional review board. It is a board, all right? So institutional review board, which means it's a group of peers, typically professors. We have an IRB at St. Thomas University, and it's a group of peers, typically professors, who evaluate the applications for research, especially when it involves human subjects and or animal research, all right? These have to go through an institutional review board because it's serious. There could be, not that Antonio wants to harm his students or anything like that, and probably the type of the techniques that he wants to test are not harmful in any way. You know, he's not playing with their minds or anything. But sometimes in designing experiments, we may not see all of the possible consequences that there are. Okay, and therefore another set of eyes on that proposal, that project, is important. And typically IRB members are the established professors. I mean, it's a mix, but they come from different fields. So some may have more expertise than others in the particular project or proposal that is being reviewed. But definitely any type of research or project that involves human subjects, that involves human beings, has to go through an IRB, okay? It also has to do with the credibility of the institution by way of monies that may be coming from the federal government or state. They have requirement. These grants and these funds are not without strings attached. And one of those strings attached is that the institution who receives the grants or the funds needs to have an IRB to look at the projects that are that the fund is going to be funding. So yes, this is kind of formalized this way with these IRBs. So definitely Antonio needs to run that through the IRB. Not only that, who should Antonio be checking with even before taking it to the IRB?
His students?
His
His
PI, right? His PI. When in doubt, check with the PI. When not in doubt, also check with the PI. So, I mean, Antonio is a teaching assistant. He's a TA, which means that he is teaching some of the courses of his principal investigator, of his thesis director, etc., where in his lab. It's a psychology lab, fine. But Antonio is not at liberty just to design any project and go ahead and test it on the students, because those students really belong, if you will, academically to the principal investigator. Antonio is teaching on behalf of the main professor, okay? So this project needs to be, the whole dissertation needs to be consulted with the principal investigator. Okay, let's move forward then. What do students need to be told about Antonio's project? What kind of things do you think? Again, this is kind of an open question, but what kind of things intuitively do you think the students need to be told with this project? Let's assume that they're undergrads, okay? So they can go from 18 to 22 years of age in that range, more or less. You as undergrads, what would you like to know if one of your professors or assistant professor was going to use you in a project?
In this case, would it be the risks and benefits of the project or the experiment, as well as the time requirements, what you are expected to do?
Yes, risks and benefits individually and collectively, right? Hopefully there are no serious risks, maybe some, you know, it may take extra time to do this project or things like that, but there should be no significant harm done to the individuals, right? And also what he plans to do with the results, how are the results also, how about confidentiality?
Right, that's important, extremely important.
let's say that he's going to be testing on some kind of a value system of the students, since the student population is very heterogeneous. They come from different countries, different parts of the world, different socioeconomic strata, etc. And he just wants to do like a survey on value systems of the class, of the course. Would you, how about confidentiality? Would Antonio need to maintain confidentiality of the results, or is he at liberty to share the individual results of one student with another student?
No, confidentiality is essential in this case.
The intuition, right? We have a culture in the United States, the ethos, that we tend to be on the private side, and we value privacy, we value confidentiality. Look at grades, for example. I'm not at liberty to give your grades to another student. I may do it anonymously, like in a table where I list all of the grades of the course, for example, but just the grades as a table, all right? And to see a ranking and so forth, to do maybe a little statistics, see where the average is for the class. But certainly I cannot identify a name with the grade, all right? That is unethical, and that is also illegal. So that's why many times when we hand papers back, corrected, we fold it or something, we give it to you upside down so that other students around you are not supposed to see that grade. Then if you want to publish it, it's up to you. You got the A, you can paper the university with it, okay? If you got the F, you're not going to publish it. But then that's up to you, to each student. But yes, confidentiality is very important, needs to be taken seriously. And there are ways of codifying the answers with a number. A student is given a number or some kind of an identifier, so that the data can be linked to that identifier in case one needs to refer back to the original individual student that gave this particular response, etc. But that's kept in confidentiality. Again, the PI is responsible for maintaining that confidentiality of the subject, the identification of the subjects. All right, how about formal informed consent? Finally, very interesting word, phrase dear to my heart. Informed consent. What do you think about that? This one has a yes or no answer, actually. This is one of the questions that has a yes or no answer. Do the students on which the project is going to be tested, do they need to give formal informed consent?
Yes, you need permission to conduct.
Yes, 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 yes. Again, following up on that confidentiality and that privacy. And what if, as a student, I don't want to participate in that research for whatever reason? Maybe I have to be given the option to not participate, okay? Because it's not part of the course as such, it's extra, really. It's his own project, it's Antonio's own project. And even if it were built into the course, we need informed consent whenever we're going to use students' results. We need consent. And you notice that consent is informed, all right? So we have a noun and we have an adjective. The noun tells us what it's about. Yes, I consent, yes or no. And it could be by an email. It could be typically something in writing, and an email counts as writing, virtual writing. Okay? But informed, very important. In other words, Antonio needs to tell these students what it's about, including the risks and benefits. Right? So transparency, very, very important. It's the best policy. Honesty and transparency is really the best policy. Nothing to hide here. Nothing to hide. So the students do need to consent. If the students are minors, speaking less than 18 years of age, then the parent or the guardian needs to consent, needs to be consulted and consent on behalf of the minor, again, with legal implications, right? Okay, so I think you have a good feel for this. A lot of it is intuitive, and at the same time, it's important to thematize it. In other words, to bring it forward and talk about it so that we're all on the same page, as it were. Let's go to the last case. Hua is doing a postdoctoral fellowship in a laboratory that studies cancer treatment. So this one is now about animal research. Okay. In the experiment, she is overseeing a cancer-prone strain of mice is allowed to develop visible tumors and then receives experimental drugs to observe the effects on the tumors. Hua notices that the tumors are interfering with the ability of some of the mice to eat and drink. She also notices that some of the mice are weaker and more emaciated. What's emaciated? Sometimes we run into unfamiliar words. Emaciated is a person who, or an animal who is not eating well and is getting skinny, too skinny, all right? And so emaciated is kind of starving. So weaker and more emaciated than others, which she suspects is a consequence of their feeding difficulties. The protocol for the experiment states that the mice will be treated only if they exhibit obvious signs of pain or discomfort. When she mentions her concerns to another postdoctoral fellow, okay, a peer in the research, she suggests not raising the issue, he suggests, sorry, the peer, the fellow, he suggests not raising the issue with the rest of the lab. The mice will be euthanized as soon as the experiment is over. Again, euthanized, let me hold off on that for a moment. I'll come back to this word euthanize in a minute in the context of animal research. And their nutritional status probably has little or no effect on the drug treatment. Furthermore, if it proved necessary to change the experimental protocol, the previous work would be invalidated, and the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee would need to be notified. So this would raise problems, right? If she stated what she is seeing on the mice, the emaciated and weaker mice. She consulted with a fellow researcher, postdoc, and his opinion is hush it up, don't say anything, keep it quiet because it's going to mess up our research. What can Hua do to get more information about the issue? Should she report it or not? Anyone? Let me bring it's a little long, so let me bring it up. Hua, she is working with mice in cancer research, right? And she's noticing that some of the mice are weaker, emaciated, lethargic, and essentially she feels that these mice are starving to death. So there's a concern for the humane treatment of animals, the humane treatment of animals. All right, we may not torture animals in the lab. At times we feel like torturing the students in the class, but we cannot act on those feelings. We should not torture the animals in the lab. So this is a concern she has. The animals actually being tortured, you know, because they can't eat well. So what do you think? What can she do to find out more? Well, first of all, definitely go to the PI again, because the PI is responsible for those mice and the protocol that is being used. That protocol had to go through an IRB. And the IRB should have looked at, well, what happens when the mice start starving because the cancer has progressed to the stage where they can't really feed. So there should have been provisions for that in the protocol, in the research protocol. There should have been provisions what to do with the mice if they start starving like this. They're not showing obvious signs of tumor, like I said, but they may be, the mice may be affected internally. So she can certainly go back to the protocol, to the original protocol, and see if there were any provisions being done there. If she doesn't find anything that addresses her suspicion, go to the PI, okay? And also, typically, when there is animal research, there will be at least one person in the institution that is in charge, is the zookeeper, if you will. This person is a manager and is in charge of maintaining the animals, of making sure the protocols are being followed, that the cages are being kept clean, etc. You know, all of the details of hospitality, if you will, of the animals in a lab have to be maintained, and they are maintained typically at least one person, if not a whole team, depending on how large the enterprise is, okay? And many times in large universities, the basement or the bottom floor is dedicated to the cages of animals that are being used, mostly mice, but sometimes also rabbits, other animals are used in research. Sometimes monkeys, even though we're getting away more and more away from using primates. But sometimes we do want to mention that with regards to primates, particularly in clinical, when there is a medication or a drug that is being tested, all right? There are levels of trials that are done, beginning with bacteria. Sometimes the medication is first tested on bacteria to see some kind of genetic effect, etc., whatever can be tested there, and then is bumped up maybe to Drosophila, to the fruit fly, okay? And the experiment or whatever medication is run on the fruit fly to see if it has any effect there. And if it passes the insect level, if you will, then it would be introduced into some vertebrate, maybe some fish, lower vertebrate. And then eventually we have to go into what is known as a mammalian model. All these animals or plants, whatever is used in the lab, living beings, they're called models, okay? So at some point we have to go into mammalian model, and the typical mammalian model is the mouse. The poor mouse is the one who gets it. These mice are being raised in the lab, and there are a lot of protocols that need to be followed. I can tell you, again, from the experience at Purdue on the scientific side, there were several buildings of science, but the one building that I was at, the biology building, had 5 stories above ground and had 3 stories below ground. And they kept the electron microscopes at the 3rd basement because that's where it was most stable. But also the 2nd basement was all the lab animals were kept there basically with extra filters, air conditioning ducts and whatnot to keep the place clean, ventilated. And one particular protocol that impressed me was these mice are raised and bred and reared in the labs, okay? So they're grown in the lab. So they're mated in the lab. The male and the female are mated and are kept together until the mating happens, but sometimes it's overnight, and then she does her pregnancy. It's fairly short, the pregnancy of the mice. I think it's about 20 days or so. When she drops the litter, all right, in other words, when she gives birth, the male has to be taken out right away, because sadly, the male mouse has a tendency to eat the newborn mice, little mice, all right? And so that male has to be taken out right away. And it could be that she's dropping her litter at 2 o'clock in the morning. So someone has to be on guard. If they're having a mating couple, all right, and waiting for the mom to give birth, then they have to be ready as soon as she gives birth to take out the male out of the cage. Otherwise, there are negative consequences. This dad will start eating this little puppy mice, which is unethical. It's not right. Okay. And it's also illegal because it's part of the protocol for the care of mice. And if a lab is found in violation of that, because someone fell asleep or didn't go to the lab that day or that night, then the whole lab could be shut down for violation of that protocol. So the very strict protocols when we deal with animals and the well-being of the animals, and they should only be used when strictly necessary. At the same time, we do need to use certain animals in experimentation before we experiment on humans. So drugs, again, going back to the example of medication, the medication is not going to be tested on a human subjects before testing on animals. All right, and with all due respect to the animal world, there is a substantial difference between testing a drug on a mouse or testing a drug on a human being. And so there's a certain level of risk that may be taken with animals that should not be taken with humans. And one of those levels is that the drug or medication has to be tested on animals before it's tested on humans, so that we have the guarantee that, or at least a good level of assurance that this drug is not going to kill the individual or do a serious harm, because at least it passed the protocol of already a mammalian model, which, like I say again, typically it's the mouse. Okay, sorry for the expansion, but let's continue then. How can she raise the issue of these mice who are seemingly they're starving to death here, and no one seems to be paying attention? Well, going back to the notebook, for example, she could have recorded that on her notebook because it's an observation. It may not be a direct observation of her research in particular, all right? But it's an observation that she made, and that should be recorded on the notebook. So she can go with her notebook and say, look, professor, on this day, I noticed this particular behavior. They seem to be more lethargic than the other mice. And I'm just wondering if they're eating enough or if the cancer is not overt, you know, because they're only, remember the case, they're only testing when they see the visible signs, visible tumors. And then after that is when they receive the experimental drug. But it could be that that cancer has had some effect internally already and is starving these poor mice, but they're not getting the medication. So it could be a flaw in the protocol, just to wait for the external signs before giving the medication. Okay, so I guess all of this begs the question. I gave a little hint of what I just said on question 3. Should the original protocol have been approved? She's detecting this. What could be possibly a flaw in this protocol? I'll give you a hint, it's in the first paragraph. I just alluded to it, this issue that the experimental drug is only giving after they develop visible tumors. But what if there's a progression of the cancer internally before there is any observation, direct observation? And so this could be a flawed protocol, you see? And this could call for halting the experimentation, that's going up, and essentially going back to the drawing board, as it were, redesign the protocol so that it's more humane and more accurate also. We really want to imagine testing the drug when we already have external evidence of tumors. Typically, that's a little too late on cancer, right? We want to catch it as early as possible. So yes, it's likely that the protocol is flawed and needs to be revised. And here's the case of one student who noticed it, picked it up, and is now doing something about it. Okay, we've been going for about an hour and a half again, just like last time. I wanted to point out, let me see if I can raise for a moment the book itself. And while I do that, any questions or comments in the meantime? Anyone want to comment? Anything of what we've been covering? What I want to show you, it's behind the tile here, is on the text itself, because it gives several agencies that are in charge of reviewing and revising these protocols. So like I mentioned, since most of the funding comes from federal agencies, these agencies have in their guidelines stipulations on what is the proper and humane treatment of animals in the lab. And increasingly, we're trying to use fewer and fewer animals, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. At some point, we need to use some animals. Oh, yes, euthanized. Euthanize is a strong word. Frankly, it's killing the animal. Of course, the animal at this point would have gone through some kind of treatment, may be sick already, and to euthanize the animal in a humane way is important, is essential, and there are ways of doing that. Don't want to go into too much detail now, it's premature, but if ever you end up in a lab that is using live animals, there are protocols, very, very strict protocols for handling those animals. And if the animal at the end of the experiment needs to be put to sleep, right? But it's a sleep from which the animal is not going to wake up. So it's really killing the animal. Typically, they're anesthetized so they don't feel any pain and so forth. I wanted to show you the agencies. Yes. So here's one. The Guide for the Care and Use of Lab Animals. It is part, actually, this is an act, Animal Welfare Act, and it's incorporated into the National Institutes of Health, NIH, Bethesda, Maryland. Also, the National Research Council has guidance for dealing with animals, and the 3 R's, especially, like I mentioned, mammals, but animals in general. Reduction in the number of animals used. We can do the experiment with 3 mice instead of 30 mice, then that's desirable, okay? The fewer animals used, the better. Refinement of technique and procedures to reduce pain and distress. So the technique more accurate and precise and so forth, so that it's not sloppy work. And replacement of conscious living higher animals with insentient material. If it can be done virtually, for example, now today, Dr. Fernandez raised the AI issue of artificial intelligence and this world of computers and so forth. There's a lot of research being done in that area that is virtual, games and simulations and so forth, and that doesn't involve real, actual live animals or human beings. At some point, it may have to be translated into a live animal situation, but to try to replace whenever possible and not have to use real life animals for the research. Okay, well, I think I closed the other one. All right, so basically that's what I have. Let me open the tile here. We can see each other one last time. And as always, we're going to post these. I'm going to post this. I'll make a YouTube out of it, and then they'll be posted in that Google website that we have. Have people been into the Google website already? You
Yes.
see some of the posts that we have there? Yeah, we're able to get in and so forth, no problem. Okay. Okay, Stephanie, question, comment?
No, I was just agreeing that I have been on the Google site.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good. So we're posting things
You're
there.
welcome.
Typically, there's maybe a 24-hour delay on these, maybe less. I'm going to try to consolidate these PowerPoints into a single PowerPoint that will just flow from one chapter to the other. Okay. But okay, great. So we're going to continue. Next week will be a similar format, Tuesday and Thursday at 3 p.m. And it will be 3 more chapters each time, little mini chapters, which will finish the book, but just the highlights. You notice I'm not going into detail. There's much more detail there that you can read up on. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send me an email or consult with any of the professors, okay? And I also encourage each one of you to talk with each other, especially if you are together in a particular lab, see how any of this applies. If your PI has not talked about some of these issues yet, well, raise it up with him or her so that everybody's on the same page and we have as much transparency as possible. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, any parting comments from anyone? See a couple of more chats here. Hold on. Going through the green, across, up, and there. Okay, well, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll be in touch. All the best.
All right.
I'm gonna
Thank
close
you.
the session now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for participating. Okay, oh, I need to end the recording. I remember, because now I have this upside down.